All right, hello everyone. My name is Matt DeStefano, and I am a graduate student in philosophy at the University of Missouri St. Louis. I want to start off by thanking Chad for his great paper, and thank David Killeran and everyone else that was responsible for organizing this conference. I've never been involved in an online conference before, and I'm excited to see that the medium of online conferences is being used by more and more philosophers. So here's a brief outline of my comments. I'm going to begin by summarizing Chad's paper and reconstructing his argument as I understood it. Then I'm going to point to a difficulty for Chad's argument, especially in attributing empiricism as he defines it to Mackey. Then I'll spend a bit of time talking about how we might respond to specific arguments that Chad points to against the narrow empiricist. Chad's paper focuses on Mackey's argument for moral skepticism, which is found in his Ethics Inventing Right and Wrong. This argument has traditionally been called the argument from queerness, and it has two versions. One is epistemological and one is metaphysical. Chad finds the epistemological version to be the stronger of the two, and he devotes his paper to exploring the consequences that follow from it. In his paper, Chad presents the argument as follows. Premise 1. For all propositions P and agents A, if empiricism is true, then A does not know that P, where P denotes a proposition that A believes about objective moral values and duties. Premise 2. Empiricism is true. And then the conclusion, A does not know that P, where P denotes any proposition about objective moral values and duties. Mackey argues that objective moral values are entities or qualities or relations of a very strange sort, utterly different from anything else in the universe. He briefly entertains a faculty of moral perception that relies on intuition or moral intuitionism, but Mackey thinks this is implausible given its sort of spooky descriptions that are involved. He's not sure how this faculty of intuition works, and he's not sure where they are getting these from. So Chad's paper argues that underlying Mackey's argument is a commitment to empiricism. This commitment, however, allows Mackey's argument to prove too much. Chad claims that it would lead us to difficulty in understanding persistence through time, knowledge of causal principles, induction as a reasonable form of inference, among others. Before going into specifics, let's look at the definition that Chad gives us for Mackey's empiricism. He works with the definition provided by Peter Markey in his Stanford Encyclopedia article titled Rationalism versus Empiricism. That definition goes as follows. We have no source of knowledge in S, where S denotes any subject of inquiry such as mathematics, epistemology, metaphysics, philosophy more generally, etc. Or for the concepts we use in S in those domains, other than sense experience. As Markey, the author of the entry, suggests, we should be hesitant to describe philosophers as being empiricists or rationalist simpliciter. It is possible, for example, to be a rationalist about mathematics while being an empiricist about the physical sciences. While it is common practice in philosophy, and especially in introduction to philosophy classes, to divide the early modern period into two camps, with rationalists such as Descartes, Spinoza, and Leibniz on one side, and empiricists like Locke, Berkeley, and Hume on the other, we should be hesitant to do so. Markey's assessment is that. He says that labeling a philosopher as strictly rationalist or strictly empiricist leads to problematic interpretations of these philosophers, and it fails to capture the individual nuances of these philosophers' systems. As a brief aside, Mackey actually has a book which is aptly named Problems from Locke, which is dedicated to salvaging what you can from Locke's philosophy. One of the issues which Chad presses, and I'll talk more about this later, is identity over time. While Mackey in his book talks about personal identity over time, he tries to solve Locke's problem by suggesting an account of personal identity which relies on the continuity of the neurophysiological structure of human beings. So this isn't strictly relevant because Chad is pressing the issue for ordinary objects, but it would be an interesting read for anyone that is interested in seeing what we can salvage from Locke. So I mention this because I think that we should not attribute this strict empiricism, as defined earlier, to Mackey's argument from Quirinus, or to Mackey more generally. There is an important passage in Mackey's work which suggests that he is open to many other sources of knowledge beyond just sense experience. So in his section on the argument from Quirinus, which is titled that, Mackey writes this, and this is quoting from the Subjectivity of Values. When we ask the awkward question, how we can be aware of this authoritative prescriptivity, of the truth of these distinctly ethical premises, or of the cogency of this distinctly ethical pattern of reasoning, none of our ordinary accounts of sensory perception, or introspection, or the framing and confirming of explanatory hypotheses, or inference, or logical construction, or conceptual analysis, or any combination of these will provide a satisfactory answer. So this section is important because it allows Mackey a way of responding to the charge that his argument proves too much, which Chad argues for, that other more narrow empiricists would not be able to endorse. So Mackey's strategy, he actually anticipates this argument that there are other sorts of entities which would seem equally queer under an empiricist framework. And he argues that the best solution for the moral objectivist is to look for, as he says, companions in guilt, or other qualities which would be similarly queer as Mackey claims moral values and duties are. Richard Price, for instance, has argued that an empiricism such as Locke or Hume's cannot account for ideas of substance, of necessity and possibility, number, essence, and causation. Similar to the worries that Chad addresses, we might argue that the empiricism expressed there are inadequate for accounting for these things. There seem to be two general strategies that one might take in response to Chad's arguments. The first is to deny that these things are a problem for narrow empiricism that some philosophers may endorse. They might attempt to explain how we can get from the concept of number from just sense experience alone. I don't know very many philosophers that endorse such a strict empiricism, and I do not think that this is a promising reply. I'm inclined to take the second strategy, which is to amend our epistemology, as you can see, from a more narrow one to one that's more broad. So instead, we might adopt a more general, naturalized epistemology. Without being too specific about the type of epistemology that I would like to endorse, this would arguably leave open the realm of scientific discourse, mathematics, logic, and many other sources of knowledge that are beyond just sense experience. Then we would not be subject to Chad's claim that Mackey's argument proves too much. So in order to see how this reply works, we can look at two examples that come from Chad's paper. One of the problems that Chad points to for the empiricist is to explain how we can know mathematical truths. Chad argues that an empiricist might claim that in all of our experience, the addition of two entities with two entities has always entailed four entities. And since its experience is universal, we can infer that 2 plus 2 equals 4. However, he argues that this relies on induction, which empiricism cannot give an adequate account of. Additionally, although this isn't addressed in his paper, it seems as though, while this might provide support for simple mathematical equations like 2 plus 2 equals 4, it would be more difficult to understand how our normal sensory experience can account for concepts like infinity, especially if we take our sensory experience to just consist of ordinary concrete objects. So there are several seemingly plausible ways in which we might naturalize mathematics. Briefly, we can look at the most popular accounts. So some philosophers, most notably Frege, Russell, and Crispin Wright, have tried to reduce mathematics to logic. Others have argued that mathematics is a mental construction, and still others have argued that mathematics is a group of formalized symbols. So as a last example, Hartree-Field attempted to reconstruct Newtonian mechanics by introducing concrete entities which played the role of natural numbers, played the role of real numbers, and the role of functions on the real numbers. This project is highly ambitious and very contested, but we can at least see how we can move the dialectic away from attempting to justify mathematics on the basis of sensory experience alone, and instead move the dialectic towards a naturalized account of mathematics. So a second argument from Chad's paper is one that he borrows from Bill Vallicilla from his blog Navik Philosopher. So he asked us to consider walking into our kitchen and seeing a green banana. And several days later, we walk back into the kitchen and see that the banana is yellow. Chad writes that, quote, "It seems that the banana objectively lost in acquired properties as time passed. However, it is consistent with one's perception that a different banana was substituted for each day, and this banana has not persisted." While it's not clear to me that identity over time is an easy sort of issue for any epistemological theories, there are some available options, and I'd like to sketch out one here. So one way, and what I take to be probably the best solution to identity problems, is to appeal to a four-dimensionalism. So four-dimensionalism is the view that not only do objects like bananas have spatial parts, but they also have temporal parts. So as a neat tidbit, if you've ever read any of Kurt Vonnegut's novels, he has an alien race named the Tralfamadors, and they help illustrate this point. So Tralfamadors see all time simultaneously, so they see the beginning and the end. And when they look at humans, they see sort of a worm-like creature, so with babies crawling at one end and elderly people on the other, and all of the variation between. But anyways, according to four-dimensionalism, the banana has temporal parts. So from time 1 to time 2 is one temporal part, and so on. If this theory is correct, and we don't need to stipulate here whether it is or not, we can understand the banana as having identity over time because the banana is simply a collection of its spatial and temporal parts. While the story is a bit more difficult than this, of course, this line of response is open to a more general epistemology that does not rely solely on sense experience. So in conclusion, it seems to me that Chad commits Mackey to a narrow empiricism which Mackey would resist. While Chad's paper highlights many difficulties for a narrow empiricist that also want the argument from Aquinas to succeed, I do not think that this is a problem for Mackey himself. Overall, I really enjoyed Chad's paper, and it brought up a lot of really interesting issues, and I was glad that I was able to comment on it. Thank you for listening.